Welcome to Bow Ties Sometimes. Call myself Ashley, Ed, and James. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Ash. How's things?
Very good, thank you. It's a nice sunny evening here, enjoying it. Although I'm going to be very British and say, "Oh, it's too hot, though, isn't it? It's been raining for ages. Now it's too hot. I can't cope with it. Can't cope with it." And James, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing very well. How are you guys?
I think we're good. We're looking good. Now, gents, we are continuing our run of exceptional guests. And I do believe, Edward, this is one of your little suggestions, this gentleman that we have this evening. So I think with that, I'll let you introduce him.
Thanks, Ash. So our guest this evening is an award-winning costume and set designer and writer. And the gentleman we are going to be speaking to this evening is none other than Mr. Phil Newman. Good evening, Phil.
Hello. Thank you very much for that intro.
And thank you very, very much for joining us this evening as well.
It's a pleasure.
So really, we're going to ask you a few questions. It's very informal about really your life and career. So
Okay.
I've looked on the TARDIS wiki to find out some information about you other than things I see that you're doing on Twitter all the time. Don't call it
Yeah.
X. I will never call it X.
No, I'm not calling it X either.
No, good. X, good man. So I've looked on the TARDIS wiki and I've got a bit of information about what you've done over the last 30, 40 years in the world of Doctor Who. So I'm just going to be dipping in and out of different sort of areas. So the first one I want to talk to you about is you put together Douglas Camfield, a tribute special for The Frame back in
I did.
1990. Was this something you were commissioned to do, or was it a passion project?
No, well, actually, it all sort of started 6 years before because I remember hearing the news that Douglas had died, and I'd met him once at a Panopticon in 1982, Panopticon 5, only briefly. And I have to say, probably then, I was only just really getting into fandom. I wasn't really sure. I knew he was a director, but I didn't really know that much about him when he spoke. I remember him chatting on the panel and going on about how he borrowed John Pertwee's hair for the day and things like that. But then there was the sort of shocking news early in 84 that he'd passed away. And I don't know, something in I just suddenly thought, nobody seems to be doing anything sort of about it, or writing or doing something to sort of celebrate his work on Doctor Who. And so I thought I think what instigated it in a way was I remember getting a copy of the stage and seeing in the back pages, in the ads, an advert. Well, it was like a post from A. Graham Williams, basically saying that they'd set up a Douglas Camfield Memorial Fund and asking for donations for his, to help his family. And it just said Secretary Graham Williams, and the address was in, I think, Twickenham or Richmond or whatever. And I thought, is that the Graham Williams? Because I didn't know, and I didn't know that they particularly knew each other. Obviously, in the Blu-ray documentary that's come out, they did. And so I sent a donation to the fund and wrote a little covering letter, and then got a lovely, nice letter back from Graham Williams, and it was the Graham Williams. And it I suddenly thought, why don't I'll put together a fanzine? That was really the idea. Put together a fanzine and then try and reach out and contact as many people as possible for their memories of Douglas. And the sort of main one was Ian Fairbairn, who was obviously one of those people that appeared, one part of Douglas Camfield's little troupe of actors, rep of actors. And he responded, and so we arranged an interview. I think this was early the following year. So I think I started writing in the summer of 84, and then earlier the next year, that must have been when I got in touch with Ian Fairbairn. And so I went round to his place in Chiswick, Turnham Green, and was interviewing him. And then about half an hour or 40 minutes through that interview, the doorbell rang, and he'd invited Douglas's widow, Sheila, round. Which was terrifying, obviously. But she couldn't have been lovelier. She was a lovely lady. And so I ended up interviewing her as well on the same day. And I just carried on writing. I got a nice little postcard back from Patrick Troughton, who was doing Foxy Lady up in Granada, I think, at the time. I remember following John Pertwee made an appearance as Wurzel in Bournemouth. Bournemouth is where I come from. One summer, might have been the summer of '84. I think it was. And he did this sort of skit, all dressed up in full costume as Wurzel. And then as he came out, I was there with a friend. We sort of kind of followed him towards his caravan. And I just sort of said, I'm thinking of doing this magazine about Douglas Camfield. Do you have any memories? He said, well, I don't usually talk about Doctor Who when I'm made up as Wurzel. But he still said a few lines, but I didn't have a tape recorder with me, so I had to memorize those. And then I got them, started to get more material. I had some lovely letters, I had a beautiful letter, I've still got all the stuff, but a beautifully typed letter from Robert Holmes, recalling his memories of Douglas, lovely letter from Philip Hinchcliffe, from Terence Dix, all of these, wonderful people. And it was advertised. I think I advertised it in CT, but time went on and I got busy with work and it just never happened. And then literally 6 years had passed and I knew David Howe and Steve James Walker through just being around at conventions and stuff like that. In fact, I'd probably already done stuff for the Frame, the Standard magazine, for them, some interviews. And they said, we'd like to present this, as a special edition of the Frame, and they said, I would still be editing it. Or if you like, casting an eye over it, they would put it together and design it, and then, and I would okay various things, but I didn't have to change anything because Mark Stammers did a beautiful job. Well, all three of them, they did a lovely job of it. And I got some lovely artwork. Ronald Binney did the big centre spread. Various other artists contributed stuff to it. Yeah, and then it came out and it was a beautiful glossy thing, something of which I'm still very proud. And I was able to obviously give Sheila a copy and Julian Glover and various other people who contributed to it. And I've still got a few copies now. Long story.
But no, lovely tribute to a really fantastic director. I mean, his show episodes you worked on are just so tightly directed and not a shot wasted. Everything was for furthering the story. What a director! Thank you very much for sharing that story. In that story there, you mentioned a gentleman called Graham Williams who corresponded with you, and for Doctor Who magazine, you put together a 3-part presentation of a lost interview with Graham Williams. Now that's something I'm particularly interested in because I'm a huge fan of the Williams era. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yes, well, it wasn't an interview I did. It was, I was already doing quite a few sort of interviews at that time for DWM. I think Gary Russell was the editor. I first did something for DWM for John Freeman, just as he was taking over from Sheila Cranner, and then started to do long exhibition reports and stuff like that. And then two friends of mine who I knew from my first, they were in the sort of local group in Bournemouth. They had interviewed Graham Williams, I think in 87, 88? I can't remember when but they had interviewed him. And they'd never written it up, and it was quite a lengthy interview. Not all the tapes were great quality, but I spoke to them, and they were happy for me to write it up and present it in DWM, and the editors at DWM were more than happy for that, and it ended up being a 3-part interview, a 3-part piece, if you like. But yeah, so that was a lot of transcribing and shaping to get that interview into 3 sort of decent sections and three chapters, if you like. But again, yeah, that was how that came about.
Yeah, I mean, Graham Williams is it was sometimes a little overlooked, but I absolutely love his ear, and I've got vague memories of that. Was it sort of late 80s, early 90s that came out?
No, the interview would have been, it was presented, I think, 95.
95, as late as that?
Yeah, it would have been 95 because I sort of did a fair bit for DWM in the sort of late 80s into the early 90s. And then I got really busy in the retail work that I was doing at that time. And then once I'd given that up and moved back home to Bournemouth, this was before I started training as a designer, I did loads of more interviews off my own back. And that was kind of part of that time. That was like 2 years between 94 and 96. I was doing a lot of stuff. I did quite a bit for InVision at the time as well. But 94, I just wanted to do stuff because it was a chance. I hadn't really had much of a chance for the previous few years. So it was a different kind of thing because, you know, generally I used to go out, I just used to contact people and try and get people who'd never been interviewed before.
So that was 1995. Well, being Doctor Who related show, this we're going to go back in time now. We're going to go back in time to 1993 and the 30th anniversary in the wilderness years, as they've come to be known. But you were cast as Lord Kiv in the Ultimate Marmite story, Dimensions in Time, which was. Was it a 30th anniversary story? Was it a thing on Children in Need?
Certainly was. It certainly was.
Yeah. I mean,
I won't be drawn into its canonicity because there's no doubt about it.
I mean, how did you get involved with that?
Well, I bought the costume at Bonham's, at the big Bonham's auction about 3 years previously. I went along, not necessarily intending to buy that, but I wanted to come away with something. I think it was 1990, it might have been 91. But when I, you know, browsing and stuff like that, and it was really kind of the only complete sort of alien costume that was there. I mean, they had, I wasn't really interested in Cybermen and stuff, but they had some 80s Earthshock Cybermen, and the suits were rigid. I mean, you couldn't have worn them because the paint and all the glue had dried. So, I mean, you could just hang it up and look at it. And there were some beaten up Daleks that went for about $8,000 and stuff like that. And some clown costumes. But I don't know, there was something about it because it was on like a Stockman dummy, you know, and it just kind of made me laugh. And where I lived at that time, I was living above an off license that I managed. I had a suite of cane furniture, you know, sort of large cushions, large circular cushions. And I thought, oh, that would look very funny. But anyway, I thought, well, I'm going to bid for something. So I thought, well, I'll bid on that. It was listed in the programme as Sill. I do remember that. But it was the green Kiv, the original one with the bumps on the head. But then I think it must have been sometime in the summer of 93, JNT, or there was something in CT asking anyone who had original costumes or very good replicas and wanted to be involved in a 30th anniversary Doctor Who to get in touch. And I knew John a bit because I'd interviewed him a couple of times and seen him at various events. And also when I'd helped out at Longley, he was sometimes around. So he knew, I knew him and he knew me. We weren't best pals or anything like that. But so I wrote to him, actually not really thinking he'd say yes. But I got a letter back saying, yes, you're welcome to do that. Turn up at Elstree Studios on this day or whatever. Bring your own makeup, bring all this, because you know all the makeup teams and whatever else will all be working on the special guest artists. And we didn't really know. We knew it was on the Elstree EastEnders set. That was all we kind of knew in advance. So turn up. It's professional, so it's a professional gig, for charity, for children in need. So no autographs, no photographs or anything like that. Just turn up, be professional, and you're basically an extra for a day. And so a friend of mine, who sadly now passed, a guy called Andy Hopkinson, who was a very skilled prop and costume kind of maker, he had somehow managed to get access to the mold of the trim that went around the neck cowl, the head cowl, because there's like a trim that joined the face to the cowl, the mask, the join. And he managed to make me one of my own so that I could wear it. And I'd never put the thing on properly before either. I mean, it's foam rubber, so a lot of talcum powder was involved. And And so we got there, and I put this thing on for the first time. You had to put it on sort of backwards. The join was at the back, so it's like a backwards shirt, if you like. I didn't have makeup, you know. I think Andy maybe had brought some makeup, but we were standing on Albert Square near the makeup caravan, and it must have just pure chance. One of the makeup artists came out and recognised the costume, so presumably she must have worked on Mind Warp. And she said, "Oh, I worked on that." She said, come in, I'll make you up." And so I got taken into the official makeup caravan and got made up alongside John Pertwee and Bonnie Langford. And she did it properly. I had a proper BBC makeup job. But of course that meant I was sort of stuck in it. I was able to get out of the body, but I had to keep the head on all through lunch and everything else. I do remember going to the canteen and people sort of looking around, and I'd sort of had to be careful what I ate. And so I ended up doing that. And then there was the other thing about, obviously, Kiv doesn't have legs. So they wanted everyone who turned up to be in shot in some form or other. And there's a green bin on Albert Square next to the fruit and veg stall, just outside the shop. And I'd kind of just parked myself, the tail on the bin, and it was the perfect height. And so when they came to do this shot with Fifi, with these 3D cameras, it was quite complex because it was 93, nothing was sort of cordless. And so they had these cameras which had to be constantly moving round and round with a cable runner going backwards quite often, or, you know, around to take the camera cable up as it was going round. And there had to be something in the foreground, middle ground, and background to give that 3D illusion. And they were all from Germany, and not many of them spoke much English. So it was quite a thing how they got this filmed, especially when you had people just walking in a straight line, and the camera was having to go around them as they were moving and going backwards. And anyway, so I think they did one shot through one stall with Fifi in the foreground, but they couldn't see me because the bin was on the wrong side of the stall. And so we moved the bin for the first time to the other side near the entrance to the Queen Vic. And I was sort of sat there. Mike Tucker was on set, and he gave me Icarnus's sort of blaster thing. Not that you could really see it, but I wanted to throw Brussels sprouts at Peter Davison as he's walked past, but they wouldn't let me. Health and safety risk, I suppose. So then there was that, and then not long after that, they decided to do the crane shot along the whole menagerie of monsters in front, you know, for the end of the first episode with the Rani facing off against the doctors. And so they did one take. I was still sat. Well, I was stood behind the bin, but Kiv was sat on the bin. And so they did this take, and this whole crane shot went across, and I thought, I'm not in this. and I sort of said so, and Gary did, oh yes, okay, we'll go for another take. And so for that one sequence, Kiv hovers, so you can just see me trying to get into shot as the camera goes past, just so that I'm in there for the money shot, really. But yeah, so that was it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And actually, at the end of that first day, Gary Downey then, you know, got us all together and thanked us for our work and all this kind of thing, and said, if you're available, you can come and be background artists tomorrow as well. And so I was available the next day, and so I stayed over that night, I think, and came back, and then we were wearing Astrakhan hats and ponchos in 2013. In 2013, I mean, and the 1970s as well. There was the 1970s bit as well, which was very funny because poor Mr. Pertwee. He didn't have a clue what was going on. I mean, one minute he was doing a scene with Bonnie Langford, and the next minute he was doing a scene with Liz Sladen, and he didn't really have a clue what was going on. Bless him. But I do remember he was doing that scene with, and it was in 2013. Yeah, so they changed all the prices on the fruit and veg stall with barcodes just to give a sense of the future, and dressed it up with some different fruit and veg, and you had Wendy Richard dressed as an older Pauline, and Gillian Tailforth looking not looking any really older, apart from a rather odd wig. She hasn't really changed at all now, but Wendy Richard came on set, and she was chatting with John, because they must have known each other from the carry-ons or from the stage work or something, that they knew each other. Maybe it was from the Water Rats or something, I don't know. Anyway, but you could sort of see that John, looking at her, getting a bit concerned, and so they were chatting, and she said, "Wendy, love, are you all right? You don't look very well." And said, "Well, of course I'm not, you silly old son. I've been made up to look about 80.
Oh.
Yes.
Magnificent. I mean, and what's even more amazing is you own the original Lord Kiv outfit. Have you still got it?
Yeah, I still have
wow.
it. Yeah. At the moment, it's in storage. It used to be in my cupboard wardrobe, really, but it's sort of in transit at the moment. Really, it's in a storage place at the moment. Yeah, and
Fabulous.
Of course, really, I might preempt a question that you may be thinking of, but the weird thing is that, having bought Kiv and then appeared as Kiv in Dimensions in Time, when I came ultimately to work on Syl and the Devil Seeds of Arador, I ended up designing the costume for the next Kiv. So there was this huge circle all around, not the most well-known character in Doctor Who, but it was a really strange sort of circle to complete, really. And to design and work with Chris Ryan was an absolute pleasure. What a lovely, lovely guy.
Yeah, I mean, your career seems to have sort of gravitated to the mentors. And the next question I was going to ask was about Syl and the Devil Seeds of Alador. So you're fantastic. So it's the most successful Doctor Who spin-off in history. Where did you even start on the design? I know you had you've had the costumes of the mentors, but where did you start putting your own spin on it?
Well, I mean, I didn't design. The only mentor in it was Syl, and I didn't have any input into that costume that was made by Philip Robinson, because that was a separate, prosthetics and stuff like that. But I mean, again, that was quite a strange. It started because Keith Barnfather, Real Time Productions, posted something, I think, on Facebook. I think it was. He posted something, for an up and coming project, looking for a production designer, and I knew Keith on and off over the years. I'd never worked with him before, so I messaged him. We were still Facebook friends and whatever. So I messaged him. I said, "Well, that's what I do." And I've never, over all this time, I'd never worked on anything Doctor Who related in my design career, if you like, because most of my stuff is theatre generally. I never really thought it would cross paths, really. And anyway, so I dropped him a message. And so apparently, as it turned out, so did Robert Dick, who obviously fronts a lot of the Mythmakers things for him. And I think he dropped him a message and said, "Well, Phil does that." And so we exchanged messages, we met up. And I think the first thing we did actually was Chris Ryan's Mythmakers, which we did at the Colour House Theatre, which is a little children's theatre that I've had a residency at for the last few years. And so we did that, and the Kiv costume was there in that. I brought the Kiv costume along, sat him in a chair, in a rocking chair actually, and it freaked Chris out a bit. Chris wouldn't look at it because his face. Because I got a face cast. That was something Andy Hopkinson did after Dimensions in Time, because obviously the cowl was empty. He actually again managed to get access and did a face cast in foam from Chris Ryan's original, so that the cowl kept in shape. And so, yeah, when it's there sat on a chair, it looks like Kiv is there asleep in the chair. And yes, so he had already done Nabil's Mythmakers, and I think the idea for it had stemmed from a conversation that, yeah, it was just an idea that Keith had. Would you ever do Syl again? Would you ever play Syl again? And he said, well, it would have to be only if Philip Martin wrote something. And then Keith contacted Philip, and it went from there. By the time I got involved, there was already a draft script. It did change a little, but I don't think I knew any other cast at that point. And then gradually I found out that Sophie Aldred was going to be in it, playing Mistress Nar, and I think the original idea was Philip Martin had originally thought he might play Lord Kiv, but then he got a bit poorly and so wasn't able to do it. And so Keith approached Chris Ryan, and so that was how, he'd already done the Mythmakers. Maybe he'd already asked him about Syl at that point, I'm not sure. But yeah, so then that was when I found out I was going to be designing a costume for Chris as another version of, if you like, of Lord Kiv. And then Janet Henfrey and, Sakuntala Ramani and all, and it was just, it was like, whoa. It was just amazing. And so from a costume point of view, it was about creating this world in the future. Like I said, I didn't have to worry about the mentors, and the character that Chris was playing was like an Earth lawyer, but who'd had Kiv's consciousness. He just happened to look like him. But I probably had the most fun, obviously, designing Mistress Nar's outfit, because she was never explicitly stated as being a draconian. Our approach was really that she was mixed heritage. So she looked predominantly draconian, but she wasn't pure blood draconian, which gave us a bit of leeway in terms of what we needed to do prosthetics wise and makeup wise. But it also gave me something, because she was a seductress. And so I wanted to keep to the same sort of color tones as the draconians. And there were various elements I managed to incorporate in the costume that sort of harked back to the draconians without him being, and also all the draconians we saw in Frontier in Space were all male anyway. And one of the nicest finds, I managed to find some little pentagonal coral earrings, green coral earrings. They're very subtle. You can barely, I think you can, but we did hook them into the big lobes on her prosthetic ears. But it was a nice thing because they all had hexagonal things on their chests. So I was able to get little motifs like that into the costume. And she loved the costume, and she wore it beautifully. So it was, that's just a thrill anyway. And for the set, we were working in a small studio in a converted barn in Hampshire, in the middle of nowhere. And it was quite, I can't remember how big it was, but it was, 15, 20 feet square-ish, I think. And it wasn't massive. And with a big white cyc going around one corner. And it was a tight shoot. We had a 5-day shoot, and I had about 3 or 4 days prep to get stuff built. We pre-built. I had stuff pre-built beforehand. Some elements. So again, harking back to sort of Frontier in Space, the idea was this was a lunar colony prison. So it was on the moon, and of course we'd seen a prison on the moon, in Frontier in Space as well, and we'd had a discussion to start off with as to what year this would be in, what year this would be set in. I think Frontier was set in 2540, and Mind Warp had been set. I think the year was stated at the beginning of the story by the Valeyard. I think that was like the 23rd century or something. So we sort of set it sort of in the middle. But again, that kind of, because in Frontier in Space, they used the South Bank with all the brutalist architecture. And so I'm thinking that if they were going to build a structure on the moon, it would probably come in sort of modular, like concrete blocks, which they could then, it wouldn't be decorative, it would be completely functional. And with buttresses and various other elements in kind of brutalist architecture. So that kind of gave me a look and a feel there. And then we just had lots of different, two main areas. We had the main courtroom and the cell, and then we had, which we did all in the space of about 4 or 5 hours on the Tuesday night, lots of corridor scenes of the guards moving still down these corridors and into a lift and all this thing. And it was all done in the same space, but moving pillars around and buttresses around and a few flats and putting a bit of tape on the floor. And Keith said it was like working at the BBC back in the 80s. And but one thing I was really happy that I managed to incorporate was, while we were thinking of surfaces, wall surfaces within the lunar colony itself, I remembered, working in theatre, quite often we'll use fact form paneling plastic to create texture. Usually it's fact form brickwork, so you haven't got to paint out every single brick and everything like that. But there's a supplier that supplies usually sort of 2 metre by 1 metre plastic sheets, which you then paint. And I knew that in the catalogue, there was like a small section of the triangular modular moulding that Jeremy Bear had first designed for the Mutants in 1972 for the Skybase. And I knew that was in the catalogue, but of course, theatre, you don't really design much spacey stuff. So I'd never had an opportunity to use it. But of course, then I was thinking that we needed some texture in the corridor. And so I said to Keith, I said, we could use this, bring this back. Because it had become synonymous with every BBC sci-fi series ever. Captain Zepp, Blake Seven, all of this triangular modular thing was everywhere. And I thought, well, that just helped bring it into that same universe, really, visually. And so I was able to bring that back. So that was that was a nice thing to do. I was glad I managed to get to do that.
Fantastic. And as I said before, it's the most, and with a capital THE, the most successful Doctor Who spin-off in history. What does it feel like to be part of that legacy?
Oh, it's an absolute privilege to be working on it anyway. To be working with those people, and Keith is very good at picking teams, selecting the right people to work with each other, so that everyone is just focused on doing what you do. When you've only got a 5-day shoot for something, it was meant to be 70 minutes, and it ended up being like a 4-part Doctor Who story, really, 425s roughly. But when you've only got that amount of time, you haven't got time for egos or, and it's like, but Nabil led, because he was first in every day, last out every day, because he was having to put all this stuff on and then off. Not a word of complaint, pure, just total professional. But everybody was, because it was just a great thing to be involved with, working on a Philip Martin script. All of this stuff. It's like it still kind of blows my mind, that I got to work with those people. And it was a really tight-knit team. So it was a privilege to be involved. The fact that it ended up winning so many awards was incredible. I'm sure the BBC didn't like it very much.
We've actually had a question from a listener this week as well, from a certain Mr. Simon Guerrier.
Oh,
And
really?
Simon
Okay.
asks, if the square on the hypotenuse equals the sum of the square of the other two sides, why is a mouse when it spins? And we would like an answer, Phil.
Well, I've never known the answer to that one.
There we go, Simon. Phil's never known the answer to that one. I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for submitting that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Mr. James Sylvester just to carry things on. Thank you very much for speaking to me, Phil.
You're welcome, Ed. Thank you.
Oh, bless you.
Hello, James.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine.
I must urge caution. Ed's never wise to hand over to me, but I will do the best I can. Phil, again, as Ed says, thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure listening to you with the stories you have about things. I was thinking about it when I was looking at prepping this. I think you were probably writing for DWM around the time I first probably started reading it. So I will have, I'm sure, read everything you ever written. Yeah, you and me both now. I remember you were known, and you still are known in your time with DWM to interview a lot of people who weren't necessarily first choice or who weren't necessarily always in the spotlight. I'm sure they were your first choice, including a lot of designers, people like Michael Young, John Bloomfield. I'm sure, given your background, a lot of that was a conscious choice, but how much of that for you was about spreading the love to some people who perhaps didn't get in the spotlight as much as they should do, and how did you go about choosing who to approach?
Yeah, it was, like I said, I had been in retail management and training, and I packed that in at the end of '93. And so from the sort of spring of '94, I was unemployed. I had time on my hands, and I hadn't decided where I was heading either. And I just thought, I should do some doctor interview. I didn't ask anybody. I mean, I didn't approach, I didn't say, would you like me to? I just thought, I'm going to try and get some interview people. And then once I've got them, then I'll go to DWM and say, you interested, or Envision or whatever. And the first one I did was Virginia Weatherall. And I went to interview her. She had a little sort of chic boutique in Notting Hill, I think it was. I don't presume she hasn't still got that, but anyway. So she was absolutely lovely. And at that point, I couldn't remember whether or not she'd ever been interviewed before. It wasn't really about that. I just trying to find some interesting people. And I hadn't interviewed anyone in a little while. And then I kind of just got into the idea of, because Barry Newbury and Ray Cusick had been interviewed at length, mostly in the frame, and in Jeremy's book, The Early Years, and so on and so forth. And I thought I think it became a bit later after I'd sort of decided I was going to go back to college and train. Well, just do an art and design course. That was all it was. I didn't know I was headed into theatre at that point. And I thought, well, there's all these other designers and nobody had spoken to them. And so it was a conscious thing on my part to try and track some of these people down, if I could, and see if they were interested in talking about it. Yeah, so it was fascinating. I wasn't going out there necessarily looking for material, if you like, or photos or designs or anything like that. It was really just, those two, obviously, Barry Newbury and Ray Cusick designed so many episodes and stories, so quite rightly they were like they had been the first choice, but a lot of other people had done some very interesting work. And so yes, I used to plough through the White Book or various directories in the library and try and see if I could find numbers, and sometimes I'd call or I'd leave a message, and sometimes I'd write. And I didn't get to interview all the people that I contacted just for time, or sometimes they weren't interested, etc., etc. There were a couple I made contact with, but they weren't interested. So that was that. Well within their right, you know. But I mean, the one that stands, well, there was sort of two. John Bloomfield was interesting because he was working on big major Hollywood feature films at that point. I think this was 95, and I think I must have left a message on a phone number, and then he rang me back, and he was speaking from his trailer on the set of Waterworld in Hollywood. Maybe it was Hawaii, I don't know where they filmed it, but he was on set, and we spent about an hour on the phone chatting about Face of Evil and Talons of Wind Chain.
It's beautiful.
From there, but I mean, the one that kind of blew my mind, and again, I'm still sort of really proud of that, was when I contacted Roger Cheveley, the designer of the war games, and I remember him I must have written to him, and he wrote a nice letter back saying, you know, that he'd be happy to talk, but he didn't think he could probably remember very much. And so on and so forth, but perfectly happy to meet. And so we spoke, and I went round to his apartment in the Barbican. Very nice, sort of stylish, quite sort of abstract-y kind of apartment there. And I just remember going in, and there it was like I'm sure it was like a frosted glass table with 2 boxes of slides. Well, I saw them there, didn't say anything, but I just saw them they got, you know. Anyway, so we got chatting and stuff. He said, "Oh, I dug these out," and then you lifted off the lid, you know, held it, and there were all these colour slides from the war games. And I don't think any colour images existed from the war games at that point. And I've got shivers down my spine now. I can remember what it was like. They had that just like, you know, the war chief, you know, in his domain, and all this abstract pop art, and then the bright primary colours, you know, bright yellow, bright red, and all this kind of stuff. And it was just like, whoa, hang on a minute. Yeah, that was amazing. And he was such a lovely guy. We kept in touch for a bit afterwards because he was interested, because I was just starting this journey towards being designer myself. So we kept in touch for a while. People have said they're not sure whether he's still around. I don't know. I should try and follow it up and see if he is. Yeah, so that was very special. And I made a point of, because he let me borrow the slides and then actually let me keep them. But he when it came to DWM, I made an appointment. I was in London to go pop into the office, because the office was still in London then, to bring them in, and just, you know, Gary Russell was just like, so that was a moment. That was a moment. So
I bet it was. I mean, there's an awful lot that you've directly contributed to. I mean, those, as you say, those photos, nobody knew about them. Those slides, nobody knew about them until you had that conversation.
I was lucky, but, you know, just pure luck. I didn't know he had them. He said he might have a couple of. I think he'd said he might have a couple of slides somewhere. Well, it wasn't a couple of slides. It was about 40 slides, including some of the recce of the rubbish tip and the farmhouse from the early episodes and all that kind. I mean, it was just, yeah. I didn't expect that. So yeah, lucky. But I'm glad I found it, because I mean, they may never have been seen.
Absolutely. And you've carried on that. I mean, not in terms of disclosing slides, I suppose, but you've carried on that passion of speaking to people who don't get as much of the limelight as maybe they should, right the way through your career, really. I'm thinking most recently, to my mind, that listeners will know about, maybe the 2018 Evil of the Daleks animation release, and you spoke to Chris Thompson, and your interview was included on the extras of that. So it's lovely to see that you've continued that vein of bringing a little bit of glory to people who deserve it, who haven't maybe had as much as they should have over the years. I suppose it's a cliche question, but is there a particular interviewee, not necessarily a designer, but somebody who you haven't had the opportunity to talk to that you would really love to draw attention to?
Let me think. I might need to come back to that.
And that's fair enough.
I might need to come back to that. I think there were certainly some people that I tried to get hold of and never did. I mean, I would have loved to have interviewed Peter Brahatsky, but he'd already long gone by the time I started to get involved in fandom and stuff like that. Probably him, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved to have met him. I did a piece for Richard Bignell, Nothing at the End of the Lane, a few years back, because I wanted to, and part of my thing for that was to try and redress the balance a bit, because I was able to sort of see some of the working drawings and stuff, of all the different set elements that had been, designed for Unearthly Child, and you think this, and it was all done in quite a short space of time, and it's like, this isn't a guy who doesn't care. And I kind of always felt that his reputation had been rather tarnished. Well, by Verity Lambert, Waris Hussein, everyone else had always said, oh, he didn't care, or he was very sort of lapsadaisical about it and whatever. And you think, but that's not what it looks like. Yes, it looks like, I don't know what happened on the day of the recording of the pilot, but clearly it was highly pressured. And it looks like it wasn't necessarily refined on the day, on the studio floor. But in terms of the actual design, it's like, it's still here now. Over 60, all the core elements are still there. And yes, they've been tweaked and added to and expanded and blah, blah, blah. But the TARDIS design has always remained roundels to some degree, a 6-sided console, time rotor, blah, blah, blah. And the detail of it, yes, he probably over-designed it, I think. I think this console was probably over-designed. It was over-ambitious. But it's better, as a designer myself, it's better to sort of go too far and then pull back than to design something that you then got to constantly add to or tweak to zhuzh up to make it work. And so I did have like I was quite keen to make a point about, and I remember speaking to people like Jan Vincent Rudsky who did interview Peter Brahatsky, in the mid-70s. And there were a lot of things there that made sense because, he came from Silesia. He was very self-conscious about his language and stuff, about understand how he came across communicating. He may not have been a natural communicator vocally, but people can communicate visually. And I think that was part of what was going on. I think, maybe he was quite abrasive in some ways or, not very communicative or chatty, but that doesn't mean to say he wasn't doing his job. And so I kind of felt, as a designer, because I'd been a designer myself at that point, and it was like, well, if somebody else was saying that about me, I'd like, and when the evidence is there on screen that clearly he did just, he wasn't lazy, that kind of, it kind of hit a raw nerve, I think, in a way. And I thought that, something else needs to be said here. And so it was an opportunity to kind of level the field a bit. And of course, I got the opportunity to talk to his widow, Gabby, who also put various things in context, and so that was lovely as well. But other people have also, written, I think Graham Kibble-White was also doing something for DWM almost at the same time, quite coincidentally. And so we sort of crossed paths at that time. I think he ended up speaking to one of his sons, and I ended up speaking to Gabby, but there was a bit of cross-pollination going on there. But, even down to how to pronounce his name, that was something I was quite keen to know because, Peter Bracharki, Peter this, Peter that, and it's like, let's do it properly. I remember seeing Barry New. He was quite poorly at the time, but I did go and meet Barry Newbury very, briefly. His daughter. I went with his daughter, he said everyone in the department used to call him Peter Brackett.
Right.
Well, back in the 60s, I'm sure it was the kind of thing that people might have found funny, but it kind of says everything as well, doesn't it? They couldn't
really
be bothered
does.
to learn how to say how to pronounce his surname. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you did a grand job in shedding an awful lot of light on him. And yeah, for a chap who was supposedly lazy and disinterested, as you say, his designs are still there, untouched broadly for 60 years later. So, my word, I think you're quite right to try and redress that balance a little bit. Having come from the background you had, right, doing your own interviews, you had a fanzine connection, you were edited Celestial Toy Room for the Doctor Who Appreciation Society for a time. So you're already well versed in writing features and articles about the show. So I'm interested in how did approaching that work differ, or did it differ when you were doing it for the official publication? So were you working under any greater restrictions? Did you still enjoy that kind of freedom? And I suppose connected to that, with your experience of having worked for the official side, the unofficial side, the spin-offs and stuff like that, is there a camp that you feel more naturally at home in?
Not really. I mean, I'm just a fan at the end of the day. And I still mostly love the show. I try to be positive. I try to find the positives in things because there's so much to be negative about in this world at the moment. I think, I see a lot, and you probably see me reacting a little on Twitter every now and again. Yes, I don't have much time for people who are just constantly nitpicking and constantly criticising and constantly finding fault, when it's just a program at the end of the day. But it's a program that gives a lot of pleasure, and and it's been a huge part of my life. Not necessarily by design; it's just ended up being like that. No, I mean things have kind of come along. Sometimes one thing leads to another. I was doing stuff for Neil Hutchings on Celestial Toy Room, and it was actually a strange little thing about the Doctor Who movie that led me to DWM, because I did a little feature. Again, it was one of those. I was doing the letters. I did the letters page for a short time for CT, christened it Points of Who, which I thought was funny. I'm not sure many other people did, but I did. And Neil Hatch did a lovely little logo for it as well, based on the Sylvester McCoy title sequence. And in the post, I got this really strange little letter, and it looked like it had been written by like a 5-year-old. Really strange handwriting, presumably disguised. Somebody disguised it, and addressed to me at home back in Bournemouth then. And I opened it up, and inside was this little note in the same kind of handwriting. If you want to find out more about the Doctor Who movie, ring this number. And inside it was like a letterhead, was like a torn off corner of a letterhead with the diamond logo, but with the movie along the base, as though it was like a prototype logo thing. I must still have it somewhere in a folder. And it's just, it's bizarre, this strange letter, And but one day I just thought, well, I might as well try and ring this number. And I rang the number, and I ended up speaking to Peter Lytton for the next half hour, who was one of the producers on it. So, yeah, I mean, bizarre. But he was lovely, and I chatted to him a few times. He was perfectly genuine. I mean, I know nothing came of it ultimately, but they were serious about doing it. But having done a feature in CT, then that was when John Freeman got in touch and said, would you like to do a small piece for DWM? And so that was the first thing I did. It was only like a half-page thing. Probably not the most salubrious kind of, piece to do an article on, give it in hindsight, but it was just, I was doing it with the best of intentions. I wasn't trying to sort of promote something that was dodgy, or because we just didn't know the whole situation. But anyway, so that led me to DWM, and then mostly it was Longleat reports that I did for a while, an annual report, because I used to go down I think I did the first one for CT or TARDIS, CT TARDIS. I did, may have been 86, I think it was 86. I did a report. And then John asked me to do one for DWM the following year, just after I'd done the movie article. And I started to go down and then got to know Lord Martin and Martin Wilkie, Martin had just started coming on board to design the exhibition at Longleat. And that was the only one I could really get to from Bournemouth easily. I only went to Blackpool, the original Blackpool, once, the year it closed. And so it became a regular thing. And I'd go up actually for a week or something and stay at a local B&B on the farm or something. And I used to help them out at the exhibition, painting the floor black late on a Sunday night or something like that. But I mean, to me, that was just a bit of fun, in a couple of weeks off from work, doing that and doing some displays. I remember when they first put the Rani from Time and the Rani in with the giant brain, and JNT was there that day, and I was taking photos of the exhibits. And he said, "Oh, hang on a minute." And he went in and he scrunched up some newspaper and he made Kate O'Mara's bosom fuller in the costume. He said, "That looks more realistic now." And so I was able to get really good close-up photos, of the exhibits. Quite often not with the perspex in and things like that, because I was there while it was still being done. And so I did that for a few years. I can't remember, till about the early 90s, I think. Probably it was when I changed location in my job and the hours there were insane. So I kind of dipped out for a couple of years until I left. And so that was kind of that. But no, I mean, it's just, some things they've just sort of happened, really. Yeah, I don't think there's been no sort of arc to it, really. Looking back, it's bizarre sometimes. But like the kid thing going full circle is the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah, possibly ever at all.
Yes. Yes.
But it's just all very natural, and it's lovely. I did want to mention, before I finish up my bit of it, alongside your Doctor Who related projects, you mentioned it already, your resident creative set and costume designer for the Colour House Theatre in South London. Design is quite clearly one of your passions. We can see that in the interviews you conducted and your work over the years. So I expect that helping showcase the importance of design work to drama, to theatre, and also hopefully helping instill an appreciation for it in your performers must be pretty rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I do. I mean, really. I mean, again, it's not the sort. It wasn't really planned in any. I packed in the retail career. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, except not go back to what I had been doing. Went along to an adult learners open day at the same college I'd done my A-levels at 12 years previous. Thinking, because I was starting to do interviews and stuff, it's about time I learned how to type properly. That was really my reason for going. But then I got chatting to the woman on the art and design table, and they were holding interviews the following week for an art and design course, which I'd never had the confidence to do at A-level, really. And so I went along, and then they offered, I mean, I didn't have a portfolio. I mean, I had a couple of Doctor Who, a TARDIS console I'd made out of old Tesco Checkout 82 posters and things like that. I've still got it. It still survives. 42 years, bloody hell. I took a few models and they offered me a place on the course. I got a grant. That was a 2-year full-time course. At the same time, I joined a local Amdram group because I'd always fancied doing a bit of acting. And as it got closer to the end of that 2-year course, I knew I wouldn't be able to just get a job because it was quite a broad-based advanced GMVQ. We literally got to do a bit of everything: photography, graphics, textiles, fine art, ceramics, yeah, whatever, which was great. It was just, for me, it was just like fun, even though I was probably the oldest on the course. In fact, for my second year, one of my tutors was younger than me. But I just found that funny. But I, you know, by the time I was getting towards that, theatre design just seemed like a natural progression, because I spent 2 years with the drama group doing stuff for them, and I'd started to do a bit of scenic painting and kind of rudimentary design. But you know, but again, I didn't do that with any sort of thought that would become anything. It was just, I was just doing stuff I enjoyed, really, while I had a chance to enjoy it. But then I got a place at Croydon College, studying theatre design, and that was a 3-year full-time course. And I designed my first show between my second and third year on a small pub theatre in near Warwick Avenue, Maida Vale, and graduated in '99 and turned freelance in 2000. And you know, 24 years later, touch wood, I'm still going. I'm not rich. In fact, I'm probably less rich. But you know, that's the theatre work. That's the theatre industry for you. But I'm hanging on in there, just. And the Colour House is just a small is a small. It was a charity theatre. The charity's being wound up now, but I'm still involved in the theatre near Wimbledon, and we basically do musical fairy tales for kids, for families, really, sort of slightly pantomime-esque, but they're colourful. Usually only 3 or 4 actors in a show. Shows about an hour long, you know, and I've ended up writing some of those shows as well in the last few years as well. So the writing has sort of come into that, and I kind of would like to do some more writing, in terms, you know, in a theatre context, which I haven't really done. I have done a few at the children's theatre, but I haven't really done anything outside of that. But again, it's not really the priority. The priority is always just to keep designing, really, and working. That's really the sort of aim. But every project's different. You know, it's never boring.
No, I bet it is.
Yeah, literally every job is different. Every play is different. The theatres are different. Not the Colour House, that's the same. How do you make it different each time? But of course, that connection brought Mythmakers Live there, because they've done 2 Mythmakers Live events there, which I've sort of designed the setting for, and then been involved with, you know, liaising with the actors and the guests. And there may be another one there, who knows? But yeah, so that's kind of where it is. But I do love what I do. I do love what I do. The Doctor Who thing, like I said, they're kind of 2 separate things, and they haven't often crossed over, but they do cross over on occasion. Yeah, there've been times it's like interviewing Chris Thompson and doing it obviously as a designer as well, which I think was part of the reason why John Kelly asked me to do that, for The Evil of the Daleks. And what a release to be involved with. You know, that was lovely. If you're going to pick an animation. Not that I did. It wasn't. We did it as a separate thing in the hope that it would be picked up and used on the blue, you know, when they came to animate it. But when we did the interview, we didn't know for sure it was going to be animated. Or at least I didn't. They may have known. So yeah, I mean, it's lovely. And I'm still doing a little bit. I did the set for the Doctor Who and Collectors strand for the Blu-ray sets. But they were all done at the same time. But Steve Broster has done a segment for the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So the 60s one was out on season 2, and there's a 70s and 80s instalment to come. Not sure when we'll see them, but
something to look forward to, definitely.
Yeah, there's still 2 installments of that, but that was all done at the same time in the same studio where they filmed behind the behind the sofa.
Oh, fantastic. I'm going to shut up at this point because Ed's far more eloquent than I am. But Phil, I really, really do appreciate your time and being so open with your anecdotes and so just entertaining and lovely to listen to. So
Oh, well,
thank you very much.
It's fun.
Thank you ever
Right,
so much. James, just want to echo what you're saying there. It's been a fantastic evening. Phil, I've loved your stories. I could probably sit here all night, actually, to be fair. But none of us have probably got that time. So we're going to do it perhaps we should just come back another time and listen to some more stories. It's been amazing.
That's fine. No, it's been fun. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been lovely.
So on that bombshell, after all Phil's stories, what can I say? It's I know what I'll say. It's goodbye from me.
and it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from them.